Welcome to the Praxis Report, the podcast where theory meets practice and where we dissect politics from a revolutionary, radical perspective. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brown, and I'm here with my fellow co-host, William Barth. And today we're going to be discussing Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and the Doge cuts to government services. And we're going to look at this perspective from this idea about the welfare state and why universal welfare programs are popular, but means-tested neoliberal programs, the kind that Trump and Musk are proposing to cut, are founded in a sort of unpopular way with the majority of American workers. So we're going to get into a history of this question of the role of government, the role of citizenship, whether government programs should be universal, who should be responsible for administering programs for the poor, and what the role of welfare is in maintaining a capitalist system or in pushing us towards reform and ultimate revolution over that system. Will, you have any opening comments you'd like
I think that's well stated, John. I guess the thesis that we propose is to distinguish between two types of federal approaches to so-called social welfare programs. One is a universal approach. That was the approach most notable during the New Deal, which really helped found and build the modern day Democratic Party. And that approach was one of universalism. We'd call it an approach that was founded on this idea of citizenship and social universal insurance and protection. In other words, this idea that if you're an American, there are certain fundamental sort of rights that go with American citizenship, not just in the political sphere, but also in the social sphere. So that things like a minimum income, an affordable home, an adequate food supply, the right to access a job, a guaranteed job, and if necessary, a federal job. That these are universal rights that every American citizenship has by right, along with obligations to America, whether it be some form of commitment to serve in the armed forces or a commitment to serve in some form of national service where you take care of the national wilderness or our national parks, or service the elderly, the conditions of elderly in rest homes, or this sort of thing. So the idea of a universal approach to these programs, as opposed to this contemporary approach of the sort of modern day neoliberal Democratic Party, I guess you'd say, which is that we should only provide help to those we deem truly worthy of the help or truly needy. And that, of course, is a subject of debate. Who is needy and who is not needy, and who should qualify for assistance and who should not qualify. And that's the sort of, I think, thesis and distinguishing characteristic that we want to drive this discussion.
Yeah, very well stated. Excellent outline. So that's what we're going to discuss as the background. So to get into that, let's start at the beginning. This idea of welfare itself. So when we go back to, the dawn of capitalist modernity, when we first had, what they speak of as kind of classical liberal era of, like, the French call it laissez-faire capitalism, where it was sort of hands off. The state played a role, obviously, in providing the foundation for building a market economy, but the state was hands off in the sense that if you were destitute, if you were poor, if you were in debt, if you were disabled, if you were elderly, if you were sick, the state would leave you to your own devices. And it was mostly, private charities, religious organizations, social workers that would have to pick up the slack, or you would just be left on the street to starve to death in slums, like what England looked like during the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. So mostly at the beginning, this idea that the government has any responsibility to provide for the poor and the sick was completely unheard of at that time. And it really wasn't until the capitalist system faced a major crisis in the form of the Great Depression in the late 1920s and 1930s, that the government was sort of forced to take action because not many people realize this, because a lot of people will say, oh, welfare, that's a socialist policy. But at the time, there was this debate. We had a famous socialist in Germany named Rosa Luxemburg, and she argued we either can have reform or we can have revolution. And she kind of argued that welfare is a reform measure that the capitalist class, the government, puts into place because they're afraid that the depression is so bad that workers are going to rise up and revolt and overthrow the whole system. So they need to sort of put into place some kind of measurements that will prevent the worst excesses of capitalism from afflicting the population. And that's really the basis of the welfare state as we know it today. And of course, in the United States, the New Deal was the predominant form that President FDR put into place to, again, he wasn't a socialist. He was attempting to save capitalism from itself by making it more just, more fair, by helping the needy. But what he did that was different than today, of course, is that his programs were universal. They, like you just mentioned, Will, they were for all citizens. And so you discussed this concept of citizenship and what the welfare state means when these programs say, everyone as a citizen has the right to Social Security when they're elderly. Everyone has the right to a job. Everyone has the right to a home. Everyone has the right to health care. So that is a fundamentally different thing than what welfare has transformed into today. Would you say that's a correct
Right.
analysis?
I think that's, again, a brilliant summary, John. Absolutely brilliant. The only thing I would add maybe to enhance our discussion or for the listener is that what we're talking about are sort of market economies generally. And this idea that you don't have to be a Marxist-Leninist to understand that within market economies, there are these sort of inherent contradictions that of course, Marx was probably most famous for talking about. And that is that market economies have this phenomena of sort of, self-destructing. They call it boom and bust. Or the tendency to monopolization, where one or two firms control an entire marketplace. Well, in other words, or inherent problems like recession and depression. So when you have this sort of so-called free market, inherent in that system is that kind of result. So you have sort of two approaches. One is to say, well, maybe the entire structure of the market has to be completely reformatted or changed. In other words, a revolutionary approach to have a different kind of system, because the market system has these inherent flaws that leave people in these horrific conditions. I think Carl Polanyi, a famed scholar, calls it the market is a satanic mill. He calls it
Right.
because of what it does to people with
Yeah.
mass layoffs and mass unemployment and boom and bust and recession and depression and so forth, and inflation, which is one of the current problems. As well as severe poverty, which is another problem in the United States now. Again, 650,000 people homeless, living on the street, the gutter, on any given night. So this is the problem. And so I just want to highlight that
Yeah.
there are two approaches. One is a more structural approach, which says, look, this is a sort of inherent in market economies. We're going to have to have a revolutionary approach to correct these things, or a sort of reformist approach where we'll sort of through patchwork, correct this aspect of the problem, like adopt a minimum wage so that you can't earn less than $7.25 per hour, which is the
Yeah.
current minimum wage. Try to live on $7.25 an hour. Impossible. You
Yeah.
cannot live. But little reforms like that to correct the inherent contradictions in the system. Anyway,
Yeah, and
let's.
I think that's the point that many socialists like Rosa Luxemburg, but also Lenin and Stalin and others, they always have pointed out that, reforms do provide some material benefits to the workers and the masses, but the reforms do not address the fundamental contradiction of capitalists being based on exploitation of the labor of the workers. And so you might make it so that the way that exploitation takes place is in a more fair system where there's not as many people dying on the streets, but the still same fundamental system will be in place. And the
Right.
only reason the capitalist class gave us, these New Deal welfare programs was not out of the kindness of their hearts, right? It was because we were in a revolutionary period during the Great Depression where things were so bad that they were afraid that if they didn't act, the government would have been overthrown and there would have been a full blown revolution on their hands.
A socialist revolution, which
Socialist revolution, which
would fundamentally potentially change or correct the inherent contradictions of the system that
right.
created the crisis. But what should we move on to this debate to bring it to forward to fast forward to the modern period
Yeah,
where there's
yeah.
tremendous revolt taking place in town halls across the country, protesting cuts in various governmental social welfare programs.
Well, I think before we
How do
get
we
to
address
the
that and analyze that?
Yeah, I think before we get to the current issue with Trump and Musk, I think the most important thing that we need to discuss before that, just for our listeners, is what happened to the welfare state in the 1980s and 90s. Because we had this welfare state that was built in the 30s and it lasted in the post World War II period. It led to this prosperity. There was Lyndon Johnson. He did the Great Society and the War on Poverty, and he expanded upon several of the welfare programs. But by the 1980s with Reagan, and then even further with Clinton in the 90s, this idea was to go in this opposite direction, which we today call neoliberalism, which is a return to a sort of pre-New Deal era of capitalism, where we completely privatize, deregulate, and gut the entire welfare state. And they've replaced, these universal programs that you talked about, where everyone as a citizen has these rights and obligations to housing and worker and wages and all that. And they replaced it with something we now call means-tested welfare programs.
Correct.
Could you like maybe
Yeah.
define for our listeners what does that mean?
Okay.
Means program.
So what we have now, as opposed to a universal approach, like universal social insurance, and sort of the crown jewel of Roosevelt's New Deal was the Social Security program. That was the crown. That was the one universal program guaranteed to every American that no American would ever fall through the cracks, so to speak,
Yeah,
and live on the street and be homeless, particularly the elderly who can no longer work, are too old and frail to return to work. So the idea about Social Security was it was a universal program that protected every single American in their old age as they retire, as well as children of the so-called orphans and widows. At that time, women were not part of the workforce. So, what does the woman do who has children whose breadwinner, the man, is now dead? How are they protected? So, Social Security protected the elderly, orphans, and widows. These were particular classes. However, the program was truly universal, and it incredibly ended, in a sense, by some studies, and I don't have all the statistics with me, but it ended elderly poverty
right.
because elderly poverty was a major problem in America. But it was a universal program. Now, the argument would be, if you were following the development of this kind of approach, of a universal approach, would be how can we expand Social Security in the new era to make it even more comprehensive, to make it even more an aspect of the rights of every American citizen, so that no one, whether you're disabled or chemically or alcohol addicted or just mentally ill, no one falls through a crack. That everyone has a guaranteed income, and so you have this proposal, a very popular one now, promoted by some third parties called Universal Basic Income, UBI. But what is UBI? UBI is Social Security. In other words, Social Security is constantly, over the years, been expanded to incorporate more and more Americans. In other words, not only is every elderly person in America eligible, anyone over 62, and anyone who is, again, an orphan or a widow, and children with certain disabilities and so forth, or people with disabilities and so forth. But the idea of expanding it to a universal program that everyone in America has a basic income. Everyone in America has a basic income, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're homeless, or whether you're a millionaire. Not it has nothing to do with being means tested. In other words, what your income is. It just has to do with your being an American, and that's the idea of, I think, citizenship and social citizenship. That it has nothing to do with income levels. It's not based on whether how much money you make. And I don't want to shift the focus of your question or this discussion. But if you look at programs like Medicaid, which apparently, let's say I was doing just a little bit of research, there's some 83 million Americans covered by Medicaid insurance. It's a means tested health insurance program. In other
So
words,
could you explain a little bit? So, what does it actually mean to say something is means tested as opposed to a universal program?
well, so what it means is that you have to qualify for it by falling into a certain, for lack of a better term, a certain special interest category. In other
Right.
words, a category which we deem, the federal authority deems, worthy of help. You're
Yeah.
worthy of assistance. And what does that mean? Who's worthy? Who are the truly needy? I mean, is $10,000 a year, does that make you truly needy? Does $20,000 a year? Does no income make you truly needy? Do you have to be mentally ill? Do you have to be, what kinds of
Right.
health disabilities? Do you have to have cancer? Do you have to have hypertension? Or and what this begins to do is it so segments the population and so divides the population that the average working person who does not qualify, say, for these means tested programs, and that's probably most working people. They say, why do I care? Why should I have to take care of someone who's not pulling their own weight or has a certain disability of one form or another? Or what does that have to do with me and my family as a worker? If I don't qualify for, say, Medicaid. So again, here's the means tested qualification for Medicaid. You have to earn 133% of the federal poverty level or below. So you cannot earn more than $20,783 a year to qualify for health insurance, Medicaid health insurance. Now, if you make $22,000 a year, guess what? You don't get it. You don't qualify. There's also some other exceptions, like if you have a certain kind of developmental disability, or if you're a child with a certain kind of disability, you might qualify. You might qualify under the Medicare program for those groups. But the whole idea of means testing is it's segmenting all of these programs to certain specific classes that are not the universal working class, that are not. They're segments. In fact, it sort of divides the working class against itself. And I use the word working class loosely, but it just divides the masses in a sense against themselves, because it breaks down, these programs. It limits these programs to certain groups that we deem as needy. And there's nothing that makes people more angry than that, whether it
Right.
be
Well,
programs for to help subjugated minority groups, or certain gender classifications, or people with disabilities, or people under certain income levels. Nothing makes people more angry than saying, why should I help those people? And who helps us? Who helps the masses? Who helps the masses of working people? No one. And that's the problem I think we're facing right now.
yeah, and I think that's a good point. I have just a few thoughts on that too. I mean, so one, as you point out, these programs are unpopular because if you're making what was it, $22,000 a year?
No, no, $20,783 a
20,000.
year to get
Okay.
Medicaid
Yeah.
health insurance.
Yeah,
If you
so if you are working at a job and you make $22,000 a year,
you
then
don't get it.
you don't get Medicaid. So it creates this division based on income between people in the working class, and I think that breeds division and resentment because the average working person is going to say, I work for a living. I work 40, 50, 60 hours a week to put food on the table, and I'm still struggling. I'm in debt. I can barely pay my rent. I can barely afford my health insurance. I can barely afford my bills. Can't pay my groceries and gas bills. But these people that don't work, they get food stamps, they get welfare, they get unemployment checks, they get Medicaid, but I have to pay for all that stuff out of my pocket, and it goes to people who aren't working. So it creates this, division. And it also creates a sort of stigma about socialism and about welfare because instead of having welfare be, like you say, a citizenship, something that is based on your citizenship, it is a duty, is an obligation, it is a right that you have. Instead, it becomes a sort of entitlement that people who are
That's what they
poor,
call it. That's
that's
what
what
they
they
call
call
it.
it. Exactly. So that creates
I
a
mean, when I say they, I mean the
the
establishment or
establishment.
yeah.
Yes, and of course I don't want to use that language because I think every single human being is entitled to having health care and food and home and a job, but in the eyes of the average person, they start to feel like they're getting screwed over because they're working themselves to the bone, but they're paying for these other people who are not working. And so welfare then goes from being something that everyone in the country universally supports and defends to being something that only a small segment is given as a sort of handout. And then it allows conservative politicians to exploit that resentment and use it to say, let's privatize every government service, let's get rid of everything, gut the whole system. And that is something that when people actually see what's going to happen, they're going to say, well, hey, actually, I kind of want my Social Security. Don't take my Social Security. I was, so they kind of, politicians are able to, manipulate people's fears on that. But because these means tested programs are not popular, they do not have mass support and mass legitimacy the way the
Oh,
programs during the New Deal had.
I mean, again, what we've seen in the last weeks on these cuts by Trump, Elon Musk, and Donald Trump, or Musk acting on behalf of Donald Trump. We
Or
see,
maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's Trump
or maybe
acts
it's
on
Trump who
behalf of
acts on
Elon
behalf of
Musk
Elon.
because
Well, that's clearly what is taking place. But you are seeing protests and angry town halls. It's been featured on the press all week, where people are going to these town hall meetings and protesting all of these so-called Doge cuts that are
yeah.
being done in an improper manner and attacking programs like veterans benefits, Medicaid benefits, and people are angry about it. But I think you're right. I don't think we're going to see. I also think there's substantial public support for Trump's efforts to end what he calls, how he defines these programs as waste, fraud, and abuse. And the
Yeah. Hey,
reason,
well, let's talk about that because the other aspect of means testing, this is something that all the conservatives complain about, is that government programs are too bureaucratic. And the thing is, the reason why these programs are so bureaucratic is because they're means tested. There is a lot of wasted resources spent to, screening people, determining their eligibility, calculating their income, getting verifications of how much they make, whether you're in the correct group to receive benefits. So in reality, means testing is much more inefficient, time-consuming, bureaucratic, and wasteful than a simple program like universal healthcare, universal social security. Those programs, you don't have to waste government funding, time, and resources and money screening people out and determining their income. You can just give the check to everybody or give the healthcare to everybody. So actually, the fact that means testing exists is a way that it kind of gives Trump and Musk this window of opportunity to come in and tell the public, hey, most people in America don't like bureaucracy. They don't like sitting in line and red tape and the DMV and all that stuff. So, hey, we're going to cut bureaucracy. But what people don't realize is that not only are they going to cut bureaucracy, they're going to basically privatize everything. And then instead of getting the universal benefits that people as citizens have a right to, we're going to just throw the whole thing out. And Trump is able to capitalize on that because we don't have an alternative. The liberals do not defend universal programs; they defend means-tested programs. So we have means-tested liberalism versus Trump and Musk doing a sort of privatization. And at least between the two, Trump and Musk are a little bit more intellectually honest because at least they're saying, "Hey, just get rid of it." Whereas the
Yeah,
liberals are,
you could even argue that their approach to privatization is universal, even though it's universal in a very negative
in a
way.
negative way.
Yeah, but it affects everyone equally. And whereas the Democrats' approach is to say, we're going to determine first if you're truly needy and who qualifies. And then we're going to create this hodgepodge of programs from food stamps to veterans benefits to aid, Medicaid and Medicare aid to the disabled children who have certain kinds of health problems, but not other kinds of health problems. And
Right.
like you said, creates all of this work for people like myself who are lawyers who, this is how we make a living because these programs are so complex that, anyone who's exposed to the complexity of these means tested programs with their myriad of regulations and appeals to appeals and so forth, if that doesn't turn you into a sort of a protesting Republican, nothing will, who says we just need to burn down this whole bureaucracy because who does it serve? How does this help working people in any sense other than at least it's giving them something which is better than nothing?
Yeah, and I think Obamacare is a great example of a means-tested program. Instead of getting universal healthcare where everyone has healthcare as a human right, we got this, bizarre means-tested program where certain income groups are eligible for a sort of Medicaid expansion. Other groups have to go into private marketplaces where you're shuffled into different income brackets to buy certain health insurances. And it's just a complicated, convoluted mess of a program. Now, of course, I mean, it did expand, access to healthcare for
It
some
expanded
people,
access, but it
but it
didn't.
did so in a means-tested and bureaucratic and, corporate market-driven way. And I think that, that's the problem with the liberals is that they claim to be supporting, welfare and supporting the poor and all of these programs, but in reality, they're opening the door to Trumpism. They're opening the door to these free market privatization by supporting means testing and opposing actual universal policies.
Right, right. It's almost like you say Trump is more intellectually honest because if instead of having this means-tested, complex, bureaucratic, sort of private market-based healthcare program, why not just privatize it and just everyone's, it's social Darwinism, we're just all in a marketplace and we're going to compete and hopefully the market will serve us or maybe it won't. And the victims,
Right, right. Well, I mean, the Trump thing. I mean, the liberal thing though is intellectually dishonest because we remember in every campaign in the last 10, 20 years, the Democrats since Bill Clinton, Clinton famously signed a law. He said, "This is the end of welfare as we know it," and he said,
right.
"Welfare is no longer going to be this universal thing. It will be this means-tested, privatized, semi-privatized thing. We're going to deregulate the government," and Clinton set the stage for this whole situation. And if you ask the average worker, hey, do you want this bureaucratic red tape, government waste, inefficient program that only the very, very poor get, or do you want to just get rid of it all entirely? And most people are going to say, get rid of it.
Get rid of it. Get rid of it because you're taking my tax dollars to pay for something that I don't benefit from, and it really it's a shame because the average worker would support something that benefits not only them and their family but all working families, and it creates what you would call solidarity.
Solidarity,
It
universal
would
program.
enhance solidarity of the
Yeah.
society, the social cohesion of the society. And you might ask every working person that they have to serve. Well, I don't. We're an anti-war movement, but some kind of national service. That should be expected of
Absolutely.
every working family. None of this. We thank you for your service, but like it's sort of like you're what do they say? You're sort of silly for volunteering for the army because I'm not going to do it. We'll let you do it. In other words, it's not universal. Only people who or usually poor people who need to enlist in the army because they want to pay for a college education or need a job.
Right.
That's who serves. Well, why doesn't everybody serve? You want to fight all these wars. You want to fight the Russians. You want to fight the Chinese. You want to fight the
Sign up.
Palestinians. On and on and on. Why don't you, enroll your daughter and your son, your 16, 17-year-old, and send them over to the Middle East and to Palestine over there and start killing Arabs or be killed by Arabs. And why not? Why don't you have any courage and morality there? If that's what you truly believe.
Yeah. We used to call those people chicken hawks, right?
Chicken hawks.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so I think, we can kind of sum up and conclude by just kind of, we obviously, Trump is taking us in the wrong direction, but we have to analyze that the liberal means tested, programs are not the solution either. And in fact, these means tested programs are what opens the door for conservatives to come in and try to privatize and cut the whole system.
Right,
So,
but we do want to highlight that if we had true universalism
yes.
in the system, in other words, if we had a system based on social citizenship that provided, I like Social Security. I don't even like universal basic income because Social Security is apparently the most popular federal government program in the entire system. Everybody knows Social Security and loves it, and it was the crown jewel of the New Deal that built the Democratic Party into a majority working class party. So why not expand Social Security to every single man, woman, and child in America, irrespective of income, disability, gender, or anything
Right.
else? Just a
And
universal program.
not just Social Security, but the famous unfinished legacy of FDR in the late in his term, right before he died, he proposed a speech calling for a second Bill of Rights, the
That's right.
economic Bill of Rights. So it would be Social Security, but also everyone has the right to a home, a living wage, health care, a
Access
job.
to a job.
And so that's something that we, as socialists going forward, have to finish that legacy. So rather than have to choose between means-tested programs from the liberals or privatization from the conservatives, we need to go towards the universal solution.
Yeah, that is the solution. Another great program was the after the end of World War II was the returning war veterans who did serve their country and defeated Nazism and fascism in the world. They came home to a Roosevelt Truman program called the FHA VA program, which many veterans after fighting the war came home and bought their homes. And that again, if there was anything that made the Democratic Party the majority party of the country, it was the Democratic Party got me my home where I had my family and my children were raised, and it was such a wonderful universal thing. And you compare and contrast that to what happened in the Obama administration during the Wall Street
Housing
crash,
crisis,
where
yeah.
every homeowner's mortgage was underwater, and Obama took an approach that he called moral hazard. Why should we help you save your home? Because you got
A bad mortgage.
bad mortgage where other people paid their mortgage and didn't lose their home. So we're just going to let you lose your home, your family's ruined, your neighborhood's destroyed, millions thrown homeless onto the streets with their families. If there was anything that ended the modern day Democratic Party, I think Obama did it with that act
Yep.
of moral hazard and not helping people stay in their homes during the worst housing crisis probably since the Great Depression or since the 60s era, so-called long hot summers. I think that really damaged the Democrats more than anything. But
Absolutely.
anyway, back
Well,
to the
uh,
theme.
yeah, that's I mean, yeah, and I think that's a good, statement we could end it on. The Democratic Party has screwed us over, screwed over the working class, and they
Right.
they've now given us Trumpism, and that is the result of Trump and Musk is a result of the Democrats' failures over the last several decades to provide a truly universal solution to these questions. And they have in turn spit on their own legacy in doing
Yeah.
so. So,
Yeah.
we'll
That's a good way to end it. Hopefully in future shows we're going to be able to provide a remedy to all this.
yeah. Well, thank you all for tuning in. We are the Praxis Report. We're the podcast where theory meets practice and where we dissect politics and current events from a revolutionary lens. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brown, and I'm here with William Barth. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Until next
See you
time.
soon. Peace.